So I got to play some Total War Pharaoh campaign. Here's my findings on what I think of the game. The first thing you'll find when starting a campaign is customization. We actually now have this in a Total War game. It's about time. You can customize the campaign with loads of different options, like many other strategy games. This is great. This is a fantastic addition that I hope to see in every Total War going forward. You can change aspects of how the AI is, how your own faction is. You can turn off certain mechanics if you do or don't like them. So yeah, this is really nice and allows you to customize to make the Total War experience you would prefer. And no, I haven't just doxed myself. This is a CA account. Loading into the campaign, the first thing you'll notice is that everything does look very nice, even though the Egyptian landscape is kind of bare, especially compared to Total War Warhammer, but as a representation of the time period and the region, it looks like it does a pretty good job. The start of a campaign is like any other. You have a small army to defeat with your starting army, and then you push on to try and take the first province. And of course, one can't help but notice that everything looks very similar to Total War Troy, but more on that in a bit. The UI overall was very nice. I do like this color scheme with the simple symbols, and the fact that there's 7 different types of building also shows you that this is a more classical historical Total War with more complicated mechanics than the dumbed down Total War Warhammer. The only thing I didn't like here is the fact that you can't really tell which building is which because it's all black, gold and grey. Although it looks very nice, it does make it harder to recognize which building type you've built. But yeah, overall I can't praise the UI enough. Whoever this UI designer is, get him on every other Total War game. Thank you. I also really like this clean and simple campaign map where everything's just color schemed off, very easy to see where everyone's kingdoms are. Even when you zoomed in a bit and it changes slightly, you can still clearly see where every faction is. If you're wondering as well what the full campaign map looks like, well, here it is. It's actually a smaller portion of Egypt than I expected, moving up through modern day Israel and Syria maybe a little bit, and then up into Turkey. And perhaps doesn't look like a huge campaign map looking at this, but I think that's fine. We don't need a huge campaign map to have a good campaign. And you may notice over here that we have native units, ones that are probably part of the region and thus will be shared by the various factions there, and then we have faction units which will be unique to your specific faction. And as you can see, they have their own unique theme, either black and gold going on or a horny helmet. I should never say horny helmet again. But what's really the question mark for me is how well they're going to do faction diversity. Are they going to feel like they play differently from each other? Is it going to feel like I'm playing the same faction no matter who I play? Because Total War Warhammer has spoiled me, at least in that way. Even though I do enjoy Shogun and Three Kingdoms, which kind of work in the same way as this. But I'll be curious to look at that with the full game, because in this version, this build, I was only able to play this one campaign. I wasn't able to play custom battles, so I couldn't look at any other factions, only Ramesses. Oh, and I think they did add in these banners above our units' heads. You see the blue ones on mine and the yellow ones on the enemies. Those got added in after the last time we got to put videos out for this, where everyone said, where's all the banners? We can't tell which faction's which. Well, now we've got these, so that's something. Another nice little visual is these little fight scenes at the end of a battle. I really like these. I think they were in Troy as well, but they look a little better here. Imagine these in Warhammer, they would look fantastic. Although a lot more work with all the different sizes of the various units. So yeah, overall the game looks visually great. There's obviously a lot carrying over from Troy, which makes that job easier. And the game ran really well as well. I was getting 160 FPS on ultra highest settings. That's on a 3080. Wasn't really buggy at all as well. But again, I think that's probably because everything's carrying over from Troy. It's made those jobs a lot easier. Onto some of the various mechanics. There's a new one in Outposts, which are basically like building add-ons for the main settlement. So you'll still have the main settlement, that's what'll get attacked and where your armies will be and all your usual buildings will be built. And then an outpost will have a bunch of options of buildings that you can choose to put there, which will provide certain benefits, whether it's more of an economic benefit or more of a military benefit or something else. So it just kind of adds this extra layer of depth to the kingdom management. And while outposts can be attacked, I think they can only be taken by taking the settlement they're connected to. Otherwise, you've got the usual province management mechanics of workforce, which is basically your growth. Idle workforce, that's your growth points that you use to upgrade the settlements with. Then you've got happiness, which is public order, control, whatever you want to call it. Keep the people happy so they don't turn into a rebellion. And then also influence, which is basically your culture. The higher this is, the more resources you get. It's kind of like corruption in Warhammer. You want to keep the other cultures out of your land. So if you're Egyptian, you want to keep it Egyptian. Don't let the Hittite or Canaanite cultures take over. The tech tree is pretty much the same as any other tech tree, and leveling up your general is fairly simple too. You have these 3 stats, presence, fortitude, and ardor. Every time you level up, you'll put a skill point into one of these and it will give you buffs in certain areas, as you can see. And the higher you get these 3 stats, the more titles that you'll unlock, which is these circular disc things below. And then you can select a few of those to give you some more buffs in certain areas. You get up to 4 of them eventually. And then there's an item system like Warhammer where you can get new weapons and armor and auxiliaries to buff your boy or faction up in various ways. Somebody was definitely having a giggle when they typed in some of the possible generic lord names. The victory objectives seem a little bit different too, in that you have this kind of meter that you have to fill up, and you can do that in different ways, whatever way you like actually. And you can see here I get 1 or 2 points into the bar if I get these provinces, and once I hit 60 points I hit that minor victory, and that could be campaign done there if you want. So different paths to choose from 4 different categories: conquest, landmarks, ambitions, and feats of rule. You can see some of the conquest ones here. I didn't get too far into this, but I really like the idea of the system, that you can just fill it up with whatever you like. You play the way you like, do the things that interest you, and that'll get you to the victory, rather than just having to do a bunch of random arbitrary objectives, like destroy certain faction X and take X amount of settlements. And then there's this thing that comes around Shemzu Hall, which is where I started to get a bit lost. There's a lot of mechanics involved with this, and I didn't really have the time with the build to fully understand it all. But there's a god system, much like in Troy. You pray to gods, I guess you'll get some buffs from that. Maybe you can piss them off, and maybe there'll be some downsides, I'm not sure. There's also the royal traditions, which is kind of like the ultimate goal of the campaign. You either become Pharaoh of Egypt or the Great King of Hatti. You can choose which one, no matter who you are, I guess. And it's pretty much all about improving your legitimacy and basically making yourself worthy of becoming the Pharaoh of Egypt or King of Hatti. But let's be honest, you're going to be going for Pharaoh because you want one of these cool chin party hats. Ooh. So it's all about getting enough legitimacy to contest the crown, which will start a civil war where you'll then compete to show who could be the best Pharaoh. As you can see, I currently have 19 legitimacy, and the Pharaoh has 75, and then all the people ranked below him are the next and closest in line to getting up there, so I've got to try and beat out all these people to become the most legitimate. This also opens up the Egyptian court, so there's a whole kind of political court system. You can take certain actions against these people, try and take their positions, and make your way up to become the Pharaoh. But there's also ways in which these actions can hurt your legitimacy if they go wrong. And then there's also this legacy system, which I didn't have time to get my head around, so I'm not entirely sure how this works at all or what it means. It's the kind of thing you really need to do a few times to really understand it. But the key takeaway here is that there is a lot of mechanics in the game, which makes it feel like a good old-fashioned Total War. Couple that with the fact that it is a purely historical Total War. There's no fantasy beasts or magic or single overpowered heroes. And well, you've got a Total War like the good old days, which I'm sure will be to the delight of many. The diplomacy system is pretty much the same as Troy. You've got the 5 different resources in this game as well. Again, the same as Troy. And I personally didn't mind that. I think it's a bit different. I think it works well. There's also the Sea Peoples mechanic, which is kind of like a chaos invasion type thing. These people come from the sea and they invade your lands and try to take your stuff. They'll do that every now and again. They're not quite as intimidating as the Chaos, especially with their flamboyant hats, but I quite like this as a mechanic just to keep you on your toes every now and again. So overall, I think from the campaign side of things, this is a decent Total War game. If you are excited about it because you're into Egypt or the Egyptian history, you've got a game you can enjoy here. So why the hell did I call this a valiant defeat in the thumbnail of this video? Well, because I don't think it's going to sell very well. I think the only people it's going to appeal to is those that are really into Egypt, or those that are maybe glad to see a fully historical Total War back again. Honestly, I'm still a bit baffled why they chose this time period and Egypt for this Total War game, considering it's so close to Troy. There just seems to be no excitement at all. All of the creators, when we first learned that this was going to be the next Total War game, Pharaoh, there was pretty much a resounding sigh. Nobody was really that interested. The community seems to be in the same boat for the most part. I think it's just a really poor choice of setting and time period, and not because ancient Egypt isn't interesting. In fact, it might be one of the most interesting periods of history, but maybe not so much for their war and battles side of things, which is where this game falls down much in the same way as Troy for me. Battles is going to be pretty much all infantry and a few chariots every single battle, as it was in Troy, unless you played the fantasy side of things. And while I didn't mind it in Troy, it was nice to see something a little bit different done. I liked the map design, it was good. I liked the fact that there was like heavy mud or light grass, and that would interact with the light, medium, heavy of the different troops. That was cool, and I kind of liked it for Troy, but I didn't really want to see it again unless there was more units added in. Cavalry mainly, right? More different types of units. But alas, here it is again in a less militarily interesting way. Is that a word? I don't know. But yeah, the battles just feel a little bit bland, and there's the whole new weather system, which pretty much just feels like a gimmick that you're going to ignore because it affects everyone the same. You can't really take advantage of it, so it's just kind of doesn't really do anything. And I tried to ask myself the question, and you should ask yourself this too. If this game was set in a time period that you personally are interested in, would you play it? If all the presentation and mechanics and everything else was pretty much the same, would you play it? For me, if this was set in feudal Japan, which I know would basically make it Shogun 3, yes, I'd be all over it, I think, if they added in some cavalry to the battles and stuff. If the mechanics were kind of similar, right, you can work to become Shogun instead of Pharaoh. Yeah, I think I'd be all over that. And of course, you can't please everyone with a historical period, but you maybe can pick ones that are slightly more mainstream and exciting, and it's not that you should follow the mainstream necessarily, but, well, I guess you should if you want to sell games, but they tried out Bronze Age with the last one in Troy, why are they doing it again, is basically the question. And of course, there's a lot of people going, this isn't Medieval 3, and there's people that just dislike Pharaoh because it's not Medieval 3 and it's what they were expecting. But I think it was silly to expect this to be Medieval 3 given the history of the last 5 years or so of Total War. It always goes big Total War, little Total War, big Total War, little Total War. Kind of starting with Warhammer 2, that was the big Total War, then we had Little Thrones of Britannia, which went down like a lead balloon, then we had big Total War 3 Kingdoms, then Little Total War Troy, then we had big Warhammer 3, now we've got Little Total War Pharaoh, so in theory next year we should get big Total War. Could be Medieval 3, could be 40k if they could make it work. Those would be my two favorite boats. Either of those I'd be happy with. But anyway, I'm starting to ramble on. Like I say, I think this is a decent Total War game, and I think the team at Sophia are good at making these Total War games. They're just not really getting dealt very good settings for them. It'd be nice if they leave the Mediterranean and leave the Bronze Age and try something else. And maybe try what the people are asking for, because I don't think anybody was really asking for Total War Egypt, maybe a few people, but probably not the biggest choice. And then there's the fact that this game also costs £50, which, given CA's recent blunders with the cost of things, that's certainly not going to help its situation either. So sadly for Pharaoh, I think it's going to be a GG already. I imagine it'll fade into the depths of obscurity along with Thrones of Britannia. But like I said, if you are someone that is looking forward to this game, take heart. You should look forward to the game. You've got a decent game here if you're into the historical period and you don't mind the battles that are pretty much the same as Troy. Maybe if you've played a lot of Troy, even if you are into the period, you might not enjoy it because it just feels like Troy. I don't know. I hate to put a damning on a Total War game. Obviously, I want to see their games succeed, but they just keep choosing weird time periods for these smaller Total War games. Let me know what you think. I hope you've enjoyed this. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the future.